Let's talk about what's been going on in France. And we're going to basically be talking about what appears to be the decline of democracy in the West. Marine Le Pen, a French politician who is leading in the polls in France, was just hit with an embezzlement charge. And this is the latest in a trend of political opposition in Western or Western-style democracies getting banned from even participating in elections. Thing that they're technically citing is that she violated campaign finance laws. But if you look into some of the details of the case, it's not so cut and dry, because they're essentially saying that she used money on members of her staff for them to do things that that money shouldn't have been used for. And she's arguing that they were doing things that were related to her parliamentary procedures. And it's essentially sounding like a technicality. Now, this is a larger trend of Western countries not honoring Western values. And I want you to listen to this by J.D. Vance, because he said this beautifully when addressing European nations. Check this out.
The point that I try to make to our European friends, and I think that they're our friends, I believe that, I know President Trump does, is that friendship is based on shared values. You do not have shared values if you're jailing people for saying we should close down our border. You don't have shared values if you cancel elections because you don't like the result, and that happened in Romania. You do not have shared values if you're so afraid of your own people that you silence them and shut them up. So let's have shared values. Let's defend democracy. Let's have free expression, not just in the United States, but all over the Western world. That is the path to strong alliances in Europe.
Beautifully said. European Western democracies no longer seem to be operating like democracies. This is not the first or even the second or even the third such instance. Okay? So in the last few years, we've seen in Romania, they banned the main opposition from running for president. They threw out election results because of Russian interference. Sound familiar? In France, now they're banning the opposition from running for president when the opposition is the most popular party representing the will of the people. In Germany, they are currently trying to ban the second most popular political party, AfD, from even existing. What's going on here? In every single one of these cases, the opposition had widespread grassroots support. And in all of these cases, there's a pattern. The country's establishment will adopt far-left policies like open borders or environmental and social good policies. And these things always sound good, right? Like it pulls at your bleeding heart. Oh, of course we should allow people from third world countries into the country, because where else are they going to go? Of course we care about the environment. Of course we care about social good and social justice. It always sounds good, but consistently the result is national decline. That's what's happening in Germany. That's what's happening in France. That's what's happening in England. But when opposition points out, hey, these policies are not actually making the country better. We have higher rates of crime. We have an economy in decline. No, when people point that out, that these far left policies are not working, they're called far right. That's step two. You cancel the opposition by calling them far right, and the Western media is in lockstep with this label. It's not just here in America. No, in Europe, they have Guardian, they have BBC. Just like New York Times and CNN are actually leftist publications pretending to just be interested in the truth. No, this is happening all across the West. And then the third step is that far right party gets grassroots support. Sometimes they even get more support than the political establishment. So now that they see that the people actually support this far right movement, that far right movement or the figureheads of that movement get hit with a legal charge. And that legal charge prevents them from even running for office. It prevents an actual democratic procedure to decide who runs the country. No, one party just decides, the other party is extremist, far right, Nazis, racist, white supremacists, and just quashes it in the courts. They tried to do that in America. Fortunately, Elon bought X. We have the First Amendment. And we got the Second Amendment so that we can defend the first. But guess what? In Europe, they don't have that same level of protections. They've inherited some things from America as the younger, more hip Western democracy, but they don't have that enshrined in their DNA. So I'm actually scared for my European brethren. I don't know what they can actually even do. They don't have the same level of free speech protections. They certainly don't have the same level of gun rights. What are you going to do if your government just takes away all your weapons? In Britain, they just banned the ninja swords. I don't even know if that term makes sense. Aren't they samurai swords? I guess ninjas kind of had swords, but I think that's more of a samurai thing. But they're literally banning like swords. It's like, what are you going to do when your local government takes away your right to speak, takes away your right to defend yourself, and then actually creates a totalitarian police state? And that's what happens when you go too far right or too far left. You get totalitarianism. You get the judicial system actually being co-opted by a totalitarian agenda and squashing the resistance. I don't know what can save Europe. It actually might be America, ironically enough. It's what I think JD Vance is speaking to, because at the end of the day, look, I don't want to see Europe crumble. On a human level, I want to go to England and experience English culture. I want to go to France and experience French culture. I want to go to Germany and experience German culture. I do not want this culturally indistinct soup to be permeating the Western world. Because you know what the ironic thing about this multiculturalism, diversity at any cost movement is? It actually creates less cultural diversity. Because if every European country is just a theme park and is just this miasma of people from different countries, and they don't actually preserve the local culture that's been refined over centuries, or in some cases millennia, then the entire world looks exactly the same. And that's not actually a diverse world. So yeah, I fear for Europeans. I hope these far right movements figure out a way to actually stay influential in government and be influential and representative of the will of the people, because this is scary. And you know, here's another thing, because I think what leftists will often say is, oh, well, she committed crimes and she embezzled them and the Romanian election was Russian interference and blah, 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 blah. There's always, oh yeah, well, look at this one piece. These people are corrupt. Okay, that's interesting. Why do we never see the justice systems and judicial systems in these countries used toward leftist politicians? Is it because leftist politicians are just so spick and span and they don't commit any crimes or do something that at least could get them scrutinized on a technicality? No, it's because the leftist establishment in these countries is in power, and power wants to hold on to power. And this is a trait of the right and the left. But the difference thing is the left is more organized, because the spirit of leftism is collectivism. I think the right is unified in their opposition to the left, but I think the right is actually generally more ideologically diverse, right? You get like the Christian right, you get like the tech right, you get people who just want to be left alone, the libertarian right. It's always more diverse. Ironically, it's more ideologically diverse a lot of the time. So the left is very good at holding rank, at staying unified. And if you don't stay unified within the left, you get excommunicated. And when they're in power, they're actually, I think, better at holding on to power. So it's a scary reality. And yeah, I think a lot of these countries need a Trump-like figure, someone who's not afraid of being called a bad person, someone who's willing to risk cancellation, conviction, and even being killed to do what's right. Because something is really troubling is happening in the West. The people who are calling themselves liberals are engaging in illiberalism. The people who are calling themselves Democrats are acting undemocratically. And the people who are claiming others are a threat to democracy are actually stifling democracy. And I think what is happening at a higher level here is there's this deeper struggle between two fundamentally different worldviews of globalism and nationalism. And some balance of either is needed. You need both. But we've gone too far in the globalist direction over the last few decades. We espouse these ideas like free trade and open borders, and it sounds like freedom. It sounds like progress. But when you go too far in either direction, you actually restrict that. And now people are realizing, hey, we actually need some degree of nationalism. We need America to actually feel and be American, and unapologetically so. And yeah, we need that in Germany. We need that in France. We need that in England. No, that's not racist. That's having a national spirit and saying, hey, we need to take care of our own interests. Let France render unto France what is French. And if everyone's taking care of their own homestead, yes, then we'll all be equipped in the first world to help the people in the third world. This is not a sustainable solution, though. Like, how are we going to say that being anti-high unrestricted immigration is xenophobia. How is it helping the third world to just let them overrun the first world? It doesn't make any sense. How about we actually solve the problems in those countries, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So in the first world, people need to be abundant and strong, and then you can do things like humanitarian aid. Then you can do things like charity, but that's not what's going on. Instead, we keep on pouring more resources into this globalist program of government structures like NATO and the European Union and all of these centralized authority systems that don't focus on individual nations, value individual culture, and value individual freedom. And COVID was an inflection point because that was a crisis situation that globalists used to justify even more power being invested in the state. And we see how government and media have been in bed with one another too. That's part of what we've been learning through USAID's revelations, or DOJ's revelations of what USAID's been doing, or the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story by the government, or the uniform censorship of right-leaning or conservative or even centrist voices from 2020 until 2024. So look, I think in general, the West has just gone too far to the left. A correction is needed. And ultimately, if you disagree with that, well, you can judge a tree by the fruit that it bears, and the fruits of the West are rotting. These are countries in decline. Objectively, Western Europe is in decline. So these media outlets and leftist politicians who are all hand-wringing about far right. Well, what's your alternative? Because the left alternative has not been working. As far as I can tell, the left has actually gone more left and calling everyone else far right, and that hasn't been working. I don't think having a border and enforcing it is far right. But Western civilization has been a victim, and you know why? Because I think Western civilization is so gripped with shame and guilt that people are unwilling to even have self-esteem. That's what's happening in Germany, by the way. If you look at AfD, I actually listened to Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD. And by the way, this is like a lesbian woman who's married to a Sri Lankan woman, a brown woman. And they're calling the entire party white supremacists and far right and neo-Nazis. And does every party have its fringe? Of course. But at least listening to her, I'm not an expert on German politics, but the hour of conversation I listened to between her and Elon Musk seemed very reasonable. I was like, oh, this just sounds like someone who, is not afraid to have German pride. Despite the atrocities of the Holocaust, it's like, there's also hundreds of years of other German history that they don't want to throw away. But no, they just get labeled far right. And of course, when you get labeled far right, people don't even want to listen to you anymore because they're like, oh, I don't want to be associated with those people. And do they have a part of the party that is genuinely far right that they need to expunge? Yeah, and they've been trying to do that. So prayers for Europe, y'all, because if they don't get this stuff in hand, there's not going to be a Europe for much longer.